Hi everyone, this is Charles Bass with the USD Alumni Association presenting USD Chats with Charles, a chance to visit with alumni from all over, to hear their story and share their story, and build community among toreros. Today I'm happy to visit with Rhett Buttle, class of 2007. Rhett is the founder of Public-Private Strategies, a consulting firm exclusively focused on where the public and private sectors meet, engaging leaders from the small business community to the Fortune 100 in the most pressing policy issues of the day. He is also a senior fellow at the Aspen Institute. Rhett was formerly business engagement director at Hillary for America, serving as Secretary Clinton's liaison and private sector advisor during her run for the president. In 2014, he was appointed by President Barack Obama to the White House Business Council and served as Director of Private Sector Engagement in the Office of the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In this role, he was the main liaison between the department and the business community and is an expert on healthcare policy in that arena. Rhett also served in the Office of the President at George Washington University, where he received a master's degree, and worked in the Office of California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. And to top it off, he was president of Associated Students at USD. So Rhett, welcome and thanks for taking the time to chat.
Thank you. That is mildly embarrassing. I would also note that I think, Charles, your radio voice has improved.
Thanks so much. I do have a face for radio. So, and by the way, I tried to pare down your biography, but I couldn't really find anything unimportant to cut. So Rhett, the last time we got together was February 3rd, and how things have changed. So how are you doing, and how are things in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, and look, for all intents and purposes, I'm doing well. I think what's more important here is that there's a lot of people who aren't doing as well. We're living in such an interesting moment where we're living in one crisis on top of another crisis. We have a public health crisis, and we also have a crisis going on as it relates to racism and injustice in our country. Some would say that is a public health crisis. I would say that, but two things manifesting in one. And so, in many cases, I feel privileged to be able to, have a home and a job and, colleagues, and I'm really trying to be focused and doubly committed to some of the things that I learned at USD, which is sort of being focused and rooted in all things social justice. And that is trying to be how I spend my time. And, I think, like everyone, being candid and honest, I waffle between, moments of being challenged and being discouraged about things that are happening, and at the same time really optimistic and seeing glimmers of hope. And so, every day it's a different day, but we're getting up, we're getting after it, and trying to move the ball a little bit forward.
That's great. So what kinds of things are you working on? I say that's great because it's great that you're trying to have that optimistic attitude. I can certainly understand how it can be challenging as well. So can you talk a little bit about what you're working on these days?
Sure. So a lot of what we do is we try to help the business voice or the business community help shape public policy in a sort of more fair and just way. And as you can imagine, since COVID-19 hit, we're seeing the effects of how a public health crisis can shut down the economy. We spend a lot of time working with small business owners and entrepreneurs, big companies too, but helping them to sort of adjust to this new reality. With that has come sort of a multi-pronged approach. One has been, how do we shape the government, package the government response in a way that really makes sense for small business owners, for individual consumers. We're living at this interesting moment where the first time ever the government is, moving cash in a different way to people and to businesses, and the way that that's structured and that is shaped is really important. And we're learning a lot about that now. So we've been spending a lot of time just spending time on the Hill, spending time with the administration, spending time with external stakeholders, trying to make sure that that happens in the best way possible. Now that a lot of legislation has happened, we're not completely done. We're also turning to implementing it and what that looks like. And, just as important as being inside the government in my previous roles, being outside is just as important to getting education outreach and materials in the hands of people who need it the most, whether that's someone who's on unemployment or that's a small business owner who's been shut down by COVID, who needs to understand their financing options. So we're doing a lot on implementation on the ground. But I think most importantly about what we're doing is we're already planning for the future. And so we're spending a lot of time right now setting tables and bringing people together. That's philanthropy, government makers, policy makers, corporate institutions, financial institutions, and saying, okay, now is the time to start planning for a more equitable recovery. And how do we begin those conversations now, which sounds silly when you're in the midst of a crisis, but with so many people focused on the immediate response, we also need to be thinking about recovery. And so part of the way that we're trying to play a small role in our little effort is by setting those tables and bringing sort of unique actors together to talk about what do we want the future to look like? And is this an opportunity to create something better than where we were before?
Yeah, we hear all kinds of talk about the new normal, but I don't think there's, even going back to the old normal isn't an option. So it's really going to be interesting, and it's exciting for you, I would think, to be playing a part in that future. And I know much of your work focuses on dealing with and eliminating inequality. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm super privileged to just be a senior fellow at the Aspen Institute. We just launched a $26 million initiative with the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, which is really focused at looking at issues of inequality. And obviously, as we've been talking about with everything that's gone on, the sort of shifting landscape couldn't make this more important. And so been thinking a lot about what do the dynamics of that look like? How does think tank, or I would like to say an action tank, play a role in setting a table for those sort of actors to come together. And then obviously, given everything that's going on in the country around racial injustice, how do we make sure that those conversations are incorporated? Racial justice is linked to economic justice, and the two really go hand in hand. And so you can't have a conversation with one without the other. So a lot of the work at this point is focused on that, and really thinking through, like, what does a more inclusive economy look like, where everyone who is working hard in our country, really benefits from the labors of the hard work that they've put in. And there are too many situations today in America still where you can work hard and sort of not get ahead. And for many people, the system is working, but trying to make the system work for more people who work hard is always the goal. And that's part of the effort that we're working on.
Yeah, obviously the small business community will be, or could be, a major player in the role.
Yep.
Kind of going back a little bit about the public health crisis. I know you were very involved in the passage, in really the promotion of Affordable Care Act. What are you hearing from small business leaders right now amidst the partisan calls for the end to that act?
Yeah, look, I think, for the first time, when we're having a conversation about what to do with healthcare in this country, and when the Affordable Care Act passed, I think there were a lot of differing opinions. I was fortunate to spend a lot of time educating people about what it was. And so not necessarily having to be a part of the conversation about the creation, but in more of the conversation about what it looks like now. And I think, we're seeing the importance of that law now for multiple reasons. One is public opinion has completely shifted. I think most folks really understand the important fundamental role that healthcare plays in our country. COVID has brought that home. Not only now are we thinking about like health insurance and how it affects individuals and businesses, but also what is the role of public health and community health, right? As we're all connected in one community, and we have to think about those things. I think the second piece is that there were a lot of people who just were not able to access health insurance before. And, unfortunately, we're in a situation now where a lot of people are losing their jobs. And so for the first time, they're entering a market where they can get healthcare in a new way. And I think there's a lot of people who are really grateful for that. And I think, the optimistic piece out of this, trying to put optimism is, I do think out of this, we are going to see, to weave that connection back to business, we're going to see more people being entrepreneurial. We're going to see more people starting businesses who aren't going to necessarily go back to corporations. And there's a new way for them to get health insurance, through their state marketplace. And it really sort of takes that burden off of having to necessarily work for a full-time employer to get health insurance. That will still be the primary way a lot of people will get health insurance in our country. It's really important. We have to strengthen that, work on that, reduce costs. There's so many factors that go into that, but also providing other pathways so that people can be entrepreneurial and really do what they want. And for a lot of people who are going to come through USD like that, I think that's the sort of entrepreneurial spirit we want to encourage, the sort of change maker nature. And so, having the ability to have the flexibility to access your benefits when and where you want is an important part of that equation.
You and I talked earlier about the class of 2020, and they're walking out into this new world order, I guess. What advice do you have for somebody in the class of 2020 who just graduated. They've got their political science degree. They want to come to Washington and set the world on fire with public policy initiatives. What are you going to tell them?
I would just say be curious and open. I mean, I think, Washington is one place, and I encourage anyone who wants to come, but I would also say there's so much like important work happening in state capitals and in cities. And in some ways right now, there's a lot of political dysfunction at the federal level. And there's actually really cool work happening in cities and states. And so, not discouraging anyone from coming to DC. We'll take anyone who wants to come because we need more perspective. But at the same time, I would also say, like, what can you do in the place where you grew up? Sometimes that impact is more meaningful. What can you do for the state that you were born into? My own story, started with working in a governor's office that really allowed me to then sort of build up to doing more work at a national level. And that was invaluable experience that I still draw on and I still sort of benefit from. And then lastly, I'd just say be curious. I think, there's too much pressure, in my opinion, in American society to know what you want to do. When you start college, you have to declare a major, or to know what you want to do when you want to leave. And I just think my life has taken so many twists and turns that were not expected. And part of I think the reason for that fun journey has just been like, I've tried to be really naturally curious. And small business and business, I'm not a business major, I'm a poli-sci major, but my career has taken form around this shape between business and public policy and politics. And that's been really interesting. And now sometimes I'm like, maybe I should have been a business major, but like, my liberal arts education is what provided sort of the critical thinking skills that I needed to be able to be curious and to be intellectual. And then the last piece I would just add is, like, I think hard work just still really goes super far in our country.
One of my previous interviews was with Edward Utomi, who plays Alexander Hamilton in the national tour. And Edward said the same thing. He said, talent's important, but hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And
That's
so
right.
I think you got both, hard work and talent. But certainly,
Yeah. It's like my brother, my older brother, he's like brilliant, but I outwork him. No, I'm just teasing. So when he listens to this, I'll get a little clip.
Yeah, we'll throw his picture up if you'll send it to me.
Exactly.
So Rhett, you're a bit of a media star, having been featured in CNN and the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and now USD Chats with Charles. I mean, there's nowhere to go but down from here, I guess. But what's the key to fighting through all the noise of a 24-hour news cycle to have your voice be heard?
So I think a few things. The way we communicate is really interesting. I still very much believe in research and facts and media. I think there's a lot of folks who tell you, what's credible, all of that. I think it's really important that we return to sort of like facts and figures. So that's one piece I would say. Ground your message or what you're saying in your research and trusted sources that have sort of bipartisan appeal. I think the second piece is consistency, and people, it takes 7 to 8 times for someone to remember something. So hopefully people watch this 7 to 8 times. And then the last is, we have the fascinating opportunity now to really drive things by segment, right? You can, if you have a very specific interest, there is a YouTube show or there's a specific opportunity for you to channel that. And so really understanding the audience you're talking to, who you're trying to reach and how you're communicating, it's really important. And that's just gotten more sophisticated over time as we've moved to sort of a more digital economy. And I think that those are sort of like 3 critical pieces for me as you're thinking about communicating a narrative, whether it's a story or, quite frankly, even just the story that you want to present about yourself and sort of your role in the world.
Yeah, storytelling is such an important thing. Speaking of stories, it must be awe-inspiring to be a part of the Aspen Institute and just to be among the crowd at those conferences and meetings you get to go to. Any fun stories to share from that? Yeah,
I think, look, Aspen is this sort of amazing place where, every time we have the opportunity to do something, I just feel an immense amount of privilege. And, I think like the funniest thing I can share is, we have our Washington campus where like most of our day-to-day work goes on. And then we obviously have our beautiful campus in Aspen, Colorado, that I know many of us are like still looking forward to getting to. But as you know, the air is very thin in Aspen. And so we always tell people, like, whenever they come up for a visit, like, you have to drink water, you have to drink a lot of water, you have to hydrate yourself. I know it's like terrible to say, but one of my favorite parts of Aspen is watching really important and powerful people just kind of fall over in the midst of a conversation. I won't name any names because I think a lot of people don't realize like how intense elevation can be on your body. I know, Charles, you spent some time in Colorado and other places, so you know the role that can play. But it's a good reminder also that we're all human. And some of these people who I think we do see every day, or we think about, whatever, are human just like us. And Aspen cuts through some of that in that humanity. But I think more importantly is just sort of the set of ideals that the Institute represents, which is thoughtful democracy. It was founded out of a conversation out of World War II about the role that actually business could be playing to help create a more civil society. And I think we're back at sort of a critical moment in this conversation where people are really questioning what is the role of the government, what is the role of business. And I think particularly over the last few months, we've seen a lot of businesses step up and play a leading role in a way that's going to be really important for how our democracy is shaped for years to come.
It's got to be fascinating and an honor and privilege to be a part of that. And I'm glad to hear you're doing good work with them. So you came to USD from Las Vegas, made it all the way to the top as Associated Students President. What would you tell a nervous first-year student who's trying to find their way to make the most out of their college experience?
Yeah, I would actually tell them some of the things that I said before. I think like curiosity is really important. So I loved my time being a part of AS. I remember when I walked into the Associated Students office to first like get my application to be the director of, I think it was programming or corporate relations or something, the first one, I was like wearing pajamas. It was after brunch. We were up in the UC. We didn't have the fancy dining room that is now there. And there used to be sort of a like swipe your card, all you could eat brunch. I wandered over. I was kind of curious. I walked in the office. There was a gal there. Her name is Erica Lovano, who at the time was a vice president. She went on to be AS president maybe in 2005. And she greeted me with open arms. And I think there started like a friendship, but also like her investment in me sort of like as a leader. And it was part of that curiosity that just drove me to kind of like peek in, and then fortunately she was standing there and kind of let me in. I think that shaped a lot of my experience early on in sort of my USD career. I think the other thing was like I was part of a fraternity that was something I just never expected I would be a part of, but was really formidable to my years. Being a SIG-Up was one of the best things I did, being at USD, but not something that I would have ever pegged myself for. And so again, that sort of curiosity and openness is unique and paralleled in your undergraduate experience.
It's always fascinating to hear. If I wrote out my college experience when I was 15 and what I would expect, and then what I read when I was 21 and had graduated, nothing on the page that I wrote out when I was 15 would have been on that actual page. So, and you've been, it's been great to have you back. You've been involved in the Alumni Association Board of Directors, and you've come back and spoken to students. So that's very much appreciated that you keep USD in your amidst your very busy plans. Speaking of plans, the world is going to reopen one of these days. We talked a little bit about getting on airplanes. I know you're a major frequent flyer. What's the next fun place you want to go?
Yeah, so that is a great question. I should say our favorite place, is South Africa, and we are in the midst of planning a wedding. Some of that experience was actually shaped by the USD Poli-Sci department in taking a class on South African politics and culture, and I've continued to visit and go back and decided to get married there just because I think it's such a special country. The struggle they went through with apartheid, the sort of way that they've written their constitution, the way that they think about human rights is unique and unparalleled. And so maybe no new place this time, but maybe just a fond love for the places that we miss, and a firm desire to get back as soon as possible.
Yeah, I've moved recently, and I've been, whenever I go somewhere, I actually buy postcards and send them, but I also keep some for myself. So yeah. I've been longingly looking through my postcards from all the different trips. And I've been extremely fortunate to travel a lot, and I will again, and we all will again. So, yeah. All right. So we're gonna wrap up with these 4 relatively easy questions, just to help get to know you a little bit easier. Nothing too hard. So the first one I think is easy. So amidst the stay
Are we
at
counting
home,
down or are we counting up?
I guess we'll start. Here comes.
Okay,
We'll
number
count.
4.
Number 4. Question number 4. Amidst stay-at-home orders, you've been locked in your house all this time. What are you binge watching?
Oh, good question. Let's see. Well, so I love Grace and Frankie, so I've been redoing Grace and Frankie. I also love The West Wing, which is like old school and classic. All the new coming freshmen probably don't even know what that is. I just started an interesting series called Messiah. I'm only like two in, but I'm increasingly becoming interested in, most of my career has been focused on domestic politics. I'm getting increasingly interested in international relations. I think some of that is due to my travel. And I've become very much fascinated by the dynamics in the Middle East. And so that has sort of like informed some of my recent binge watching of different Netflix episodes.
All right. So can you talk a little bit about what's inspired you, but can you name a book or a movie that has inspired you and why?
You're going to laugh.
That's actually a hard
No, you're
question.
going to laugh.
No, I won't laugh.
It's The Lion King. I am obsessed with The Lion King. I love it as a movie. I love it on stage. And kicker, I wrote a paper on The Lion King for Dr. Kirkley's, one of her theology classes that was all about sort of like theology's impact on the media. And I remember it was like one of the few times I think I got an A- from Dr. Kirkley, which was like, she's notoriously a difficult professor and grader, but one of the best, obviously. We'll have to send her a copy of this now. But yeah, I'll never forget. And fascinating to think about theology, which was my minor, his impact on film and media studies.
All right. That's a judgment-free zone anyway, but that's a fine selection.
Grown man, Lion King.
Well, again, I mentioned Edward because he also mentioned the Lion King. So,
he did?
Not necessarily as what inspired him, but he talked about various roles he'd be interested in. So,
he did better on stage than in the movie. I mean, obviously. Yeah.
I've not seen it on stage, but I did live in a building when I lived in Colorado, and the Lion King was performing for 6 weeks across the street in the Performing Arts Center. And so our building had a number of people that were performing in the play staying in our place. And so I'd get in the elevator and always be these, they were sometimes in costume, not quite in costume, but there was all kinds of, it was very exotic and I loved it. So I'm all for the Lion King. Okay, you're in Washington, D.C. right now, but you're going to get on a plane soon. This is question number 2. Down to number 2. You're in DC right now. You're going to get on a plane. You're going to come back to beautiful San Diego, California.
Yes.
What is your go-to meal?
Oh, so many good. So probably JV tacos down the street from USD. So good. We just, for some reason, DC has such a bad Mexican food scene. What we have is we have delicious El Salvadorian food. And it's very different from Mexican food if you've never had it, and it's amazing and pupusas are to die for, but it's not a California burrito at 2 a.m. in the morning after you've left a sorority, fraternity formal, and you need a little extra meat in the belly.
Right. Or perhaps you've been at the library studying, because now, by the way, we've just
Exactly. Who doesn't need a California burrito after sitting at the library till 2 a.m.? Correct.
Right. Well, by the way, we just remodeled the library, and behind it, we've built a brand new classroom building that's going to open in the fall when we open and welcome our students back. So cool. Lots of excitement there. Speaking of the campus, the last question, number 1.
Yes.
What is your favorite place on the USD campus?
Oh, so hard. So many special places on the campus. I think probably the Institute of Peace and Justice for multiple reasons. 1, it's where I spent most of my time because I was a poli-sci major. 2, I think the building stands for something really significant and core to USD's mission. There's nothing like it. 3, it's got that killer view from the back and was a place where we had lots of different meals and discussions during my time. So we'll go with that. And, all the other places I won't mention, we can have that conversation offline.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. Rhett Buttle, class of 2007. Thank you very much for visiting and sharing your expertise with us. And you can go to publicprivatestrategies.com to learn more about Rhett and his good work. And a great resource for small businesses, by the way, is the Brink, USD School of Business's Small Business Development Center. And you can visit sandiego.edu/SBDC for that. You can also learn more about the USD Alumni Association
at alumni.sandiego.edu.
Thanks, Rhett. Stay healthy and safe, and go Toreros.
Go Toreros!